Pages. England expects, says the Sunday Telegraph, nothing to do with Brexit, just the rugby, but they've also got that interview. May told, "Don't let Hammond ruin Brexit," by Bernard Jenkins, who's one of the leading lights of the Brexiteer camp in the Conservative Party. Then there's the Sunday Times. They've got a doping scandal hitting the Winter Olympics. But they also claim that 3 Brexiteers, Michael Gove, Mr Rees-Mogg and Mr Johnson, are all plotting to get rid of Theresa May. Not a lot of detail there, but they're certainly making somebody's certainly making menacing noises. More to talk about there as well. And then, from the other side of the argument, as it were, the Observer, in its new tabloid form, has the civil service in the shape of Sir Andrew Turnbull hitting back against those people, saying it's all reminiscent of the stab-in-the-back myth in 1930s Germany, and Uma Thurman on almost every single front page, as you'd expect, having heard the news. Janine, let's start with you and that front page in the Sunday Times, that splash.
Well, you know, it's with some dread we look again at a challenge by Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Jacob Rees-Mogg. The Sunday Times have illustrated this with a fantastic picture of them all wearing musketeer hats, I assume to try and cheer us up a bit as
yes, the 3 musketeers
walk us through this again. It's not hugely detailed story.
Athos, Porthos and William Rees-Mogg. That's right.
There's a couple of sort of gory quotes about the cavalry are coming and that we're ready for a contest and there will be a war. It feels obviously like a tactical move.
There's very few details here, and we must have a certain amount of scepticism about it. But when they say, or people briefing on their behalf say, but we have the numbers in the Tory party for our wing of the argument, they're right, aren't they?
Yeah.
Mira?
Well, I mean, I think this story looks a bit like fake news to me. I mean, it's based on quotes from MPs not named, and you know, I'm fairly well acquainted with the goings-on in Westminster. It doesn't really ring true. It just points to a sense of division.
Plot?
No, I mean, certainly not this plot. I mean, this feels very unlikely. It makes for a very good newspaper headline if you want to sell newspapers, because both, you know, Boris and Jacob Rees-Mogg are kind of box office.
They certainly are,
in that sense. I think that, I mean, it clearly points to a sense of division within the Conservative Party. But I think, you know, to Theresa May's credit, she was a Remainer. She has committed to leaving the EU. And I think she is trying very hard to manage the fact that the parliamentary majority is against Brexit, and the popular view is to go for it. So that's the tension.
You worked very closely with Boris for a long time. He's basically a blushing violet. He's not interested in promoting himself, is he, in the papers? Is that the general view?
Well, I don't think he's involved in this plot, no.
Okay.
I think I can say that with honesty.
OK, but Janine, this is there is a real choice for Theresa May to make now, isn't it, about the customs union, about exactly which way she's going. I joked about her option being like a unicorn, kind of rustling ahead somewhere in the forest. You can't quite see it. We're told it's there. We haven't seen it. We're beginning to believe it's not there. We don't. But quite soon she has to come down off the fence and say she's going to be sticking very closely to the EU after we leave, or she's not going to be sticking closely to the EU at all. And that is a genuine choice for the country.
What we're seeing today is an awful lot of jostling via the front pages around what people think she should be on that question. I would just say it's not going to be fake news, this story. You know, Tim Shipman, who's written it, is a very good and very well-sourced journalist. He's not made it up. When people say fake news, I often think...
He's not made up a fact, but he has suggested that this is a warning from some Tory MPs. That's not quite the same as a conspiracy by these 3 individuals, and I think we just have to be careful to be honest about it.
No, it's
true though that there are people who are very disappointed with her and want to move the debate on. But I do think that, you know, we've been saying that for the past 6 months. This can't possibly last, and then she somehow hangs on.
Munir, I mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg a moment ago. We've all been watching him engaged in that scuffle at Bristol University, but the Mail on Sunday has got a big double-page interview with him. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a remarkable scene that was shot on video of Jacob Rees-Mogg speaking at a university.
He's been very cool about it, hasn't he? He's been saying, I'm not really bothered, it was overdone, you know.
Yeah, I mean, he's handled it fairly well, actually, because he's not overplayed the sense of being a victim at all, and he sort of shrugged it off. I thought, actually, at the event, you know, these people arrive wearing masks, clearly wanting to cause trouble, and he sort of goes up to them and starts talking to them and reasoning with them. And so I think it's quite a good look for him. Actually, I think there is a bigger issue about aggression on university campuses and students feeling entitled to close down debate, which I find very worrying. I think his way of dealing with it is probably the right one.
But his message on Brexit is pretty clear
yeah, he's cast doubt on the Treasury forecast report that was leaked this week, and he and a number of other Tory MPs have said that the civil service is not acting impartially, and there's another story in the Observer of that.
The civil servants getting involved.
Yeah.
Janine, can I just ask you a little bit about Rees-Mogg as well, because you're our social media person here today. You understand all of this. The video of this tussle, very short, rather hard to see what was going on, has been shared all over Twitter and all over Facebook, really for about 12 hours now, constantly. It's done Rees-Mogg, presumably, quite a lot of good.
Well, and there are, as ever with these things, several perspectives on the video. You can find different versions of it, and different media outlets will promote different versions, as with everything. He comes out of it just fine. I think obviously this happened and he came out of it just fine. What he did not come that well out of was casting doubt over the document last week and just, repeatedly lying. He didn't like what the document said. He didn't like that there was no good scenario. He didn't like the advice, so he just lied about the way it came. And I feel quite strongly that this war on the civil service has become an ideological position where actually you have to trust the people who have gone and done the work. They produce the facts. If you don't like them, that's really troubling, but that is what it said.
Munira, this is Sir Andrew Turnbull is the main person quoted here, who was head of the civil service back in the day, very experienced and very rarely outspoken. He mostly keeps his mouth shut, so it's interesting that he's done this.
Well, he and another former head of the civil service, or certainly formerly involved in the civil service, Robin Butler.
Oh, he was head of the civil service. Again, very eminent,
suggesting that, these attacks on the civil service are reminiscent of 1930s Germany, which I think is really overblown. I think the thing to remember in all of this is, despite the indignation that the civil service might be accused of not being impartial, is that clearly somebody in the civil service did leak this document with a view to influencing policy. And that suggests that there is a view.
Yes.
Janine, you're shaking your head. You were obviously involved crucially in the story.
That you know exactly where the source came from. But
well, I presume that something that was meant to be kept confidential until it was complete.
It
wasn't left on a photocopier, was it?
Presuming is quite
difficult. Unless it was stolen by one of your journalists, I don't know.
No. OK, let's go to your tablet now, Janine, because you've chosen another story about Facebook and the future of British elections and so on.
Right, so that's gone upside down.
It's upside down. Your tablet's no better than my tablet. I'm
actually
relieved
your
to hear
tablet,
that.
Andrew, and I believe
it is my tablet. Well,
so
there you go.
Your fault.
There you go.
So this is a story that we published last night on BuzzFeed about the Facebook news feed. And it really does play to this whole thing about whose facts and whether a fact is biased or whether the fact that you don't like the fact is the bias. And Facebook's news feed, you'll remember recently they said they're going to change the algorithm to produce less inflammatory news stories and more pictures of your lovely cousin.
So they could just twist the maths so it's slightly less inflaming. That's in itself a bit weird, isn't it?
So this has caused absolute ructions in the media because everybody's panicking about the dilution of traffic, because instead of our lovely news stories, it'll be your pictures of your baby cousin. And finally, the politicians have cottoned on to the fact that this isn't just a journalism problem, this is a politics problem. It's particularly a problem for the people who are worrying about the next election, which I know we all hope and trust is a good 3 years away, but just in case it turns out to be November.
But to be absolutely clear about this, if somebody in Facebook decides we're getting too many stories about social housing, they can change the algorithm to ensure that far fewer of them appear towards the top of our screens.
Well, I'm sure if Facebook were here, they would say...
That's an extreme example.
But they would say they would not take a subject or a bias or anything like that to change it, just away. But because of the great success of highly targeted direct campaigning during the last election,
yes,
and for the Labour Party, the Tories have been putting a lot of effort into upgrading their digital marketing. And as Jim points out in this story, our political editor, they may be changing their campaigning for the last election.
They're a bit behind the curve, aren't they, in all of this stuff? Yeah.
Campaigning for the last election. OK.
Finally, Munira, can I talk about the momentum story in the Sunday Times? We're going to be talking to Claire Coburn in a moment, but before we do, Sunday Times has done a big operation on momentum.
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. I'll lose it now. Here we go. I think this is very interesting. It's a Labour council where the leader has now walked away because she said that she was essentially being targeted by momentum activists. And I think it's very interesting that this week it's presented by a number of commentators as a kind of working class takeover of Labour. And actually, I think it's the opposite. I mean, Claire Coburn herself has said that the kinds of people who were attacking her were white-haired men
Okay.
in in million-pound houses.
We
in
should
her
say
area.
very clearly that the Momentum deny doing all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think
it has
is
become a
part-
kind of favoured media story now. The wickedness of Momentum all over the country.
Yeah, and
Bouncing up and down.
you have to be honest about what's really happening. But I do think there is a bigger shift, certainly in the Labour Party, the changes in the NEC, the way in which people who've been formerly banned from Labour have been allowed back in. And I think this goes to the heart of an issue of where the working class are in the Labour Party. It seems to be more and more removed from that working class
We're almost
vote
out
share
of
it used to
time.
have.
We're almost...
Just on that, you know, Aditra Chakraborty wrote in The Guardian this week, it's, you know, it's one person's high politics. It's also, you know, people who live in Haringey, for residents, it is a housing problem in their area and it's their regeneration issue.
A theme we will pick up in just a moment. Thanks both you very much indeed.